On a recent Saturday afternoon in Dublin, Atheist Ireland held our usual monthly Atheist Ireland information table. We do it every month in Dublin and in Cork and various parts of the country. And we promote atheism and reason as more reliable worldviews to members of the public. We discuss these issues with atheists, with theists, with skeptics, anybody who happens to pass by and want a discussion with us. And we also discuss the importance of separating church and state. And a couple of days after that, we were at a dialogue session between the Irish government and religious and non-religious groups, which has been convened under the auspices of a part of the Lisbon Treaty, whereby the governments are being forced now to treat religious and non-religious groups equally in terms of consultations on public policy issues. And at that meeting, we put the case for a secular state. We put that case alongside colleagues of ours in the Ahmadiyya Muslim community and the Evangelical Alliance of Ireland, with whom we fundamentally disagree in terms of our worldviews, but whom we agree with on our joint support for separation of church and state. And I think that hopefully captures the balance that we try to achieve in our work in Atheist Ireland. That when we are dealing with the public, we actively promote atheism and we actively promote reason. And we say that they're better worldviews, more reliable worldviews than faith or superstition. But when we are working with the state, we do not promote atheism to the state, and we do not ask the state to support us in promoting atheism. We tell the state that we would be just as opposed to the state promoting atheism as we are to the state currently promoting religion. And we say that the state's duty is to be neutral between all citizens, regardless of their religious or non-religious beliefs. And that is the basis of our policy, that we believe in a pluralist society where people are entitled to believe what they want, and people are entitled to challenge religious beliefs if they want. But that the state does not take sides. That's the absolute key to a secular state. And we're confident that in a democratic pluralist state that we can successfully put the case for atheism and reason as more reliable worldviews, because we believe that our arguments are persuasive. Now that's of course different in a lot of other states, in authoritarian states around the world, where the problems are as much based on persecution and human rights abuses as they are on faith and dogma. But in Ireland, that's the situation that fortunately we are in. And this balance is one part of why Ireland, which used to be up to relatively recently a Catholic country, has over the past decade become a pluralist society, but with Catholic laws that we're still gradually dismantling. The people have moved on and we're trying to get the state to catch up. The Catholic Church no longer controls the Irish people, but unfortunately it still has laws, buttressed in many cases by the Constitution, in place from the time that they did control the Irish people. And so we're gradually trying to remove those. In recent years, and this is something that most people wouldn't have predicted at all, even before it started happening 5 years ago. In the last 5 years, we have had constitutional referendums to remove the ban on same-sex marriage, to remove the ban on abortion, and to remove the ban on blasphemy. Now that's huge progress in a very short period of time. And I think it's part of the way the world works now, that ever from the time of the fall of the Berlin Wall onwards, we see these surges of change where it's not just gradual change. What happens is pressure builds up and suddenly all of the change happens very quickly. And I think that's what's going to happen with other items, And I think that it won't be something that Atheist Ireland does that causes it to happen on other issues. It won't be something that in your own other countries that you specifically do. Just something will happen in society that will trigger it. In Ireland, for example, with the abortion issue, it was the tragic death of Savita Halappanavar that finally made people sit up and realize, look, this just can't go on. And so something happens and that triggers the tidal wave of change. But then once that happens, all of the work that we have collectively been doing in our respective countries and together internationally, all of that work suddenly becomes retrospectively useful, because now there's a roadmap for where to go and how to move on from that change. Now, in those 3 referendums, Atheist Ireland was part of much wider political alliances on the same-sex marriage issue and on the abortion issue. But on the blasphemy issue, we led the campaign. We led the 2 campaigns, the 10-year-long campaign to get the referendum in the first place, and then the campaign to win the referendum once it was called. And so Ireland is definitely moving on. The most recent census shows more than 1 in 10 people are non-religious. That's more than all of the minority faiths combined after Catholicism. And that's a low number. That's based on a leading census question that vastly overestimates the number of religious people in the country. If you look at the number of people going to religious services, it's significantly lower than that. Most people in Ireland who say they're Catholic are Catholic in name only. They're cultural Catholics at best. An opinion poll at the time of the Eucharistic Congress in Ireland a few years ago showed that 15% of Irish Roman Catholics don't believe that Jesus is the Son of God. And 8% of Irish Catholics don't believe in God, which I would have thought would be a low hurdle for being a Catholic. So that's what you're talking about in Ireland now. It's mostly cultural Catholics, but they still have power from the laws that they had in place, which we still have to get rid of, particularly in the education system. It's our biggest challenge at the moment is that the Catholic Church still runs 90% of our primary schools and is allowed legally to discriminate against pupils and parents and teachers in order to protect their religious ethos. And that again is buttressed by constitutional provisions that we're going to have to get rid of in the coming years. And all of this is consistent with the work of the World Values Survey, which is a team of interdisciplinary social scientists working around the world on mapping human values ever since the 1980s. And what they have found quite consistently is that as individuals move away from survival values and towards self-expression values, that has a knock-on effect on society, and society moves away from traditional religious values and towards secular rational values. And that pattern is happening around the world, and Ireland is one example of it. As I say, we still have challenges to go, as well as the schools. Another big issue is we have religious oaths built into the Constitution, whereby a conscientious atheist could not become president or a judge or prime minister in Ireland because you have to swear a religious oath asking God to direct and sustain you. But we will get there, and it is the pattern, as I say, around the world. We will get to a secular state, and when we get there, we will be able to work together with our religious neighbours to build and shape a just society based on human rights. Now, while we're doing that, I think it is important that we don't walk away from our beliefs. Atheistic beliefs are more reliable than religious beliefs, and we can confidently say that, and we shouldn't back away from saying it. Faith and personal experience are the worst and least reliable ways of understanding reality and morality. Because they end up, if you think about it, they end up with different people looking at the same evidence and coming to different conclusions. Whereas, by contrast, if you apply reason to evidence, then the same people looking at the same evidence are more likely to come to the same conclusions and the same beliefs about the same reality. And when we apply reason to evidence, we notice that the idea of a God is so implausible that in real terms in your day-to-day life you can rule it out as being not there. That reality and morality are as we expect them to be if there is no God. And that there's a relentless pattern of natural explanations overtaking supernatural explanations for what is happening. That you have beliefs, that even the core typical theistic belief that their God is somehow a mind without a body, that's just an invented convenience. There is no evidence at all to suggest that a mind can exist without a body or a brain or a source of energy. So even from the very start, we can confidently say, without going into all the other details that I won't rehearse because you're all familiar with it, we can confidently say that atheistic beliefs are more reliable than theistic beliefs in terms of understanding reality and morality. But the key point is that is not the reason why we should be arguing that our beliefs should be respected and our right to hold our beliefs should be respected. We should also be arguing for the rights of religious people, even though they are mistaken, to hold their religious beliefs, as long as they're not using those beliefs to infringe on the rights of others, and we should protect their right to not be persecuted on the basis of their beliefs. There's a theoretical reason for that, which is that we should in principle always be open to the idea that we might be mistaken about our beliefs, however unlikely that may seem. But secondly, and more practically, if we believe as we do that the rights to freedom of thought, freedom of expression, freedom of belief are fundamental human rights, then we should support those rights being applied to those that we disagree with as much as those with whom we agree. Again, with the important proviso that that does not mean that people have the right to use those beliefs to carry out actions that infringe on the human rights of others. The right to believe in a God does not grant you the right to indoctrinate others into that belief, or to prevent people from criticising your religious beliefs, or to treat women as second-class citizens, or to prevent people from consensually exercising their sexuality, whatever that may be, or to have any other privileges over other fellow citizens. And to carry that out, we have to go back to the starting point that we're talking about embedding the idea that a secular state is necessary in order to protect those rights equally for everybody. Now, Atheist Ireland and our policies have a series of I'll call them starting points rather than policies, but are principles upon which we think that a secular state should be based. And the 5 that we're focusing on at the moment are as follows. Firstly, the first duty of the state is to protect its citizens, and that includes the right to freedom of religion or belief. And that's an unconditional right, along with the conditional right to exercise those beliefs as long as you don't infringe on others' rights. Secondly, the state must be secular by remaining neutral between religious and atheistic beliefs. And that's both a requirement of international human rights law, certainly for Ireland in terms of treaties that we've signed up to. And it's also the only way that the state can protect those rights equally for everybody. Thirdly, people have rights, beliefs don't have rights. So the state must protect the right of every person to believe what they want to believe and to be treated with dignity, but it must not protect the content of those beliefs from being challenged, or indeed ridiculed if you want to ridicule them. And certainly we should be allowed to challenge beliefs that we consider to be harmful or unjust, and not be told, for example, in schools that you should respect religious beliefs. The fourth point is that it's individual people that have rights, it's not majorities. And this is an absolutely critical point, and I'll give you just a very poignant, a very important moment at a United Nations Human Rights Committee meeting that we were at. This is before we got rid of the ban on abortion in Ireland. And the Irish government was being asked by the UN Human Rights Committee in Geneva why they were denying pregnant Irish women rights to abortion in circumstances that were wider than Irish law at the time allowed. And the Irish state replied that Irish abortion law reflected the will of the Irish people as allowed under Article 25 of the International Covenant on Civil and political rights, and it said that there had been laws and referendums that this was the will of the Irish people. And the UN Human Rights Committee, in probably the strongest rebuke that I've ever heard them given to any state, and very emotionally put to the Irish state, they said this is a completely unacceptable reason to deny human rights. Majority votes cannot deny human rights. Indeed, the whole point of human rights law is to protect individuals from the tyranny of the majority. And fifthly, and to borrow Marianne's organisation's title, there must be one law for all. And that must not include any rights to quasi-legal religious courts or tribunals that infringe on the rights of members of who they would call their own community. So those are the principles that we're fighting for. There's pragmatic arguments as well for secularism. Secularism correlates in many ways with important aspects of a just society. Secular societies have lower rates of homicide, of juvenile and early adult mortality, STD infection rates, teen pregnancy, abortion, a lot of things that religion is supposed to protect people from. Actually, the correlation is the opposite. And if you look at the United States, it's the Bible Belt countries that have the worst records in those areas, and the more secular states that have the better records. There are studies published by the social scientist Phil Zuckerman and others that have shown that secularists are typically less nationalistic, less prejudiced, less racist, less ethnocentric, less sexist, less closed-minded, less authoritarian. And there is a pathway to those secular rational values, which I've outlined earlier, the source of, which is the World Values Survey. Because not only has the World Values Survey shown that as individuals move from survival values towards self-expression values, that societies move in response to that away from traditional religious values and towards secular rational values. But the World Values Survey has also identified the sources that trigger those changes. And as well as philosophical changes and debates within society, it turns out that the triggers are things like investment in health and education and communications technology, and moves towards democracy, and moves towards at least perceived self-control of your life. So those are the things that we need to be trying to bring about. The type of society that interacts, obviously the cause and effect are interrelated, but that interacts with secular rational values. And I think that we can do that. I mean, certainly in the developed world it's easier, although there are challenges at the moment with Trump in America moving increasingly away from democracy, and Boris Johnson in the UK moving increasingly away from reality. And so we don't know what effect that's going to have on the sort of ongoing secular rational values in the West. But no doubt when the next wave of the World Values Survey information comes out next year, we might get some sort of thinking on that. The final thing that I want to say is that while we are working on these issues in Western countries, it's important that that those of us who live in relatively secular, stable, liberal democracies should actively support people who are courageously promoting these ideas in more dangerous areas of the world, including but not limited to Islamist theocracies. Now, under those type of regimes, and particularly the Islamist regimes, Islamism is not just a religion. Islamism is an integrated religious and judicial and political and military ideology, and it's just a form of social control and governance. And states under those type of controls will persecute not only atheists, but also other religious minorities and indeed dissident Muslims. And what most people in the West just simply blank out of the equation is that most of the victims of Islamist theocracies are themselves Muslims. Now, the laws of liberal democracy have gradually evolved over the centuries to reflect more nuanced ideas of human rights. But in Islamist theocracies, those values are still shackled to the Quran and the Hadith, which represent values of a far more undemocratic and violent era. And supporters of Islamism, unlike those of us in secular democracies, have to believe that the creator of the universe wrote the book upon which all of these values are based. And so you see things like verse 24:2 saying to flog adulterers. But it doesn't just stop at flog adulterers. It says, don't let your compassion stop you. And there are similar passages in the Christian Bible. And they're very significant because what that passage shows is that there were people in early Islam who realised that this was a disproportionate and unjust punishment. And so they had to be told not only to do it, but to not let your compassion stop you. And so it's important that we focus on the values, the rational values of rational ethical morality, which is based on things like compassion and empathy and reciprocity and fairness and cooperation and justice, rather than on creeds from those type of books. And I'll close by saying that there's an overlap for those of us in the West between two challenges there. First of all, we have to protect people who are mostly Muslims who are victims of Islamist theocracies around the world. But we must also protect Muslims in the West from anti-Muslim prejudice, including bigotry and violence, from authoritarian thugs and similar violence from authoritarian thugs on the other side of the equation who decide to answer issues by street violence rather than by democracy. And while doing both of those, the final thing I think we need to be alert to is the recent revival or attempts to revive the term Islamophobia, which is typically used to conflate two ideas: criticism of Islam, which is a good and necessary thing, and bigotry against Muslims, which is a bad thing. And it uses language to suggest that those who criticise Islam have a phobia or some type of mental illness. And so by building that word around Islam rather than Muslim, it's used to silence legitimate and important criticism of Islam. And I've just in recent months even, there have been attempts to try to revive that. So I'll end with that. I'll just briefly review some of the points that I made. When Atheist Ireland is dealing with our fellow citizens, we promote atheism and reason. When we're dealing with the state, we do not promote atheism, and we do not ask the state to promote atheism. We say the state should be secular. That this balance is one of the reasons why Ireland, which up to relatively recent was a Catholic country, is now a pluralist society with Catholic laws that we're gradually dismantling. I think we should actively promote the reasons why atheistic beliefs are more reliable than religious beliefs. And we should also protect the right of religious people to hold their beliefs, as long as they're not infringing on the rights of other people, and as long as we retain the right to criticise those beliefs. And that in order to do that, the state must be secular in order to protect that pluralist society. And that there are 5 important principles under that. The state must protect the rights of its citizens. To do that, it must remain neutral between people of different religious and atheistic beliefs. People have rights, beliefs do not. Individual people have rights, majorities do not. And there must be one law for all, with no place for quasi-legal religious tribunals. Secularism correlates with many aspects of a just society. Atheist Ireland promotes ethical secularism and human rights. We support secularists in repressive theocracies, and we oppose the injustices of both Islamism and of anti-Muslim bigotry. Thank you very much.